Good morning and welcome to IBMTV. This is the morning edition. So let us begin with our introduction. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Bill Tresvant, and I am your host for the World Edition. Why don't we begin today and go straight to our World Report? So, from IBM TV, International Broadcast Media, this is the World Edition. From Washington, D.C. to New Delhi, India. From the oldest democracy to the largest democracy. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Today is Tuesday, November 17th, 2020. There are 63 days left in the Trump administration. India is set to join the list of the nations producing Russia's Sputnik V vaccination, according to an announcement by Russian President Vladimir Putin. Production is expected to begin in all BRICS nations, and that stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Separately, the BRICS nations are set to adopt a new counterterrorism strategy. Prime Minister Modi of India said countries that help and support terrorists need to be punished. Modi said that multilateralism is going through a crisis and questions are being raised about global institutions since they haven't changed with the times and are based on the mindset of 75 years ago. He described the finalization of the BRICS counterterrorism strategy as a great achievement and said India, as the chair of BRICS next year, will take this work forward. In Nicaragua, Hurricane Iota landed as a Category 4 storm along almost exactly the same stretch that was devastated by Hurricane Eta 13 days ago. Iota made landfall with maximum sustained winds of 155 miles per hour. This morning, Iota still carried hurricane force winds as a Category 1 storm. Next, Ethiopia's prime minister declared, quote, the final and crucial, end quote, military operation will launch in the coming days against the government of the country's rebellious northern Tigray region. Prime Minister Abiy continued to reject international pleas for dialogue and de-escalation in the two-week conflict in the Horn of Africa. NATO could pay a heavy price for leaving Afghanistan too early, so say the experts. Experts warn that while Trump is expected to withdraw a significant number of American troops in the coming weeks, NATO has fewer than 12,000 troops in the area, but more than half of those troops are not U.S. troops, but rather the 30-nation alliance relies on the United States for transport, air support, logistics, and other assistance. It's unlikely that NATO could even wind down its operation without U.S. help. Peru's political crisis appeared on the verge of resolution as Congress cleared the way for an elder statesman and consensus candidate to become the country's third president in a week. Francisco Sagasti of the centrist Purple Party was selected the legislature's new president. The 76-year-old engineer has not yet been sworn into office, but as head of Congress becomes the nation's chief of state by default. In Germany urged all EU member nations to put differences aside and pass a $2.1 trillion budget and recovery package blocked by Poland and Hungary. Amid the second wave of the pandemic, the money, which includes billions in support for Hungary and Poland, is crucial for many EU nations to survive. British Prime Minister Johnson has declared that giving governing powers to Scotland has been, quote unquote, a disaster. Scotland has a government and parliament set up in 1999 with broad powers in areas including health and education. The Scottish National Party, which wants Scotland to become an independent country, leads the government in Edinburgh. It is strongly critical of the UK's Conservative government over the decision to leave the European Union. Thailand's political battleground shifted Tuesday from the streets to the country's parliament, where lawmakers are considering proposals to amend the constitution, one of the core demands of the nation's student-led pro-democracy movement. 7 draft constitutional amendments are scheduled to be voted on in a 2-day joint session of the House and Senate. Constitutional changes require a joint vote of those two bodies. Any motions that are passed will have to go through second and third readings at least a month after this week's vote. Several lawmakers left the scene by boat from a pier behind Parliament, even as the debate inside was scheduled to continue for many more hours until midnight. Thailand has had 20 constitutions since abolishing the absolute monarchy in 1932 in favor of a constitutional monarchy. Now, separately, and in other news, when New Zealand Prime Minister Ardern was re-elected last month, she brought with her a diverse cast of politicians, making up what is arguably the most inclusive parliament in the world. Almost half of New Zealand's newly sworn-in parliament are women, and 11% identify as LGBTQ. Both New Zealand's indigenous Maori and people with Pacific Island heritage are represented at a slightly higher rate than in the general population. And politicians from diverse backgrounds aren't just making up numbers in Parliament, they are in key positions of power. 8 of Ardern's 20-strong cabinet and the highest-ranking lawmakers are women. In the U.S., a hearing on Trump's lawsuit to prevent Pennsylvania from certifying the vote remains on track after a judge quickly denied the campaign's new lawyers' request for a delay. After Pittsburgh lawyers dropped out of representing Trump's campaign, Philadelphia lawyer Linda Kearns and 2 Texas lawyers also withdrew on Monday. The head of the GSA, who was holding up the Biden presidential transition, knew before Election Day that she might have a messy situation on her hands. Prior to November 3rd, the General Services Administration, Emily Murphy, called the man who was in charge during the contested 2000 election, Dave Barham. Dave Barham says he gave Murphy some simple advice, quote, "If you do the right thing, then all you have to do is live with the consequences of it." Next, President-elect Biden, a lifelong Roman Catholic, spoke to Pope Francis despite Trump's refusing to concede. The president-elect thanked Francis for extending blessings and congratulations and noted his appreciation. He also saluted the pontiff's, quote, leadership in promoting peace, reconciliation, the common bonds of humanity around the world. Also, President-elect Biden is drawing from the senior ranks of his campaign to fill out an increasingly diverse White House leadership team. The new hires represent an initial wave of what will ultimately be hundreds of new White House aides hired in the coming weeks as Biden builds out an administration to execute his governing vision. Also, Biden is warning of dire consequences if Trump continues to refuse to coordinate with his transition team on the pandemic and block briefings on national security policies, national security issues, and vaccine plans. Now, the COVID report. Moderna announced its COVID vaccine is 94.5% effective, the second U.S. vaccine, with a stunningly high success rate. But the virus is spreading at unprecedented speeds nationwide, and it could get worse before the vaccines provide relief. The U.S. has recorded more than 100,000 daily infections for 2 weeks straight. Yesterday, it had about 166,000 new cases, along with another high of 73,000 COVID hospitalizations nationwide. Governors in states including Oklahoma and California have announced new restrictions to help slow the spread. Finally, the COVID death toll from Johns Hopkins is over 247,229 American souls lost and 1,329,556 global souls lost. That is your World Edition for Monday, November 17th, 2020. So, with me, we have today a guest from Russia by way of Canada. Let's welcome in Sasha. Sasha, how are you?
Thank you. Very good. How are you doing?
Good. How's your day going so far?
So far, well, I'm involved in stock trading right now, and done a couple of trades and have a couple of orders unfilled yet. So I'm waiting for execution. The market is down today. I think the reality said that with all the wonderful vaccines being announced in the last few days, situation with COVID is getting really tragic, and I'm wondering if there will be anybody alive to use these vaccines, because by the time they will be available, there may be nobody
Well,
will be around.
Actually, Sasha, that's one of the things I wanted to ask you about. There are a couple of different things that I was just hopefully that we can explore. And the first of which is with the 2 American vaccines, that is Moderna and Pfizer, and then Sputnik 5. Although Sputnik 5, at least according to reports, published reports, it hasn't been data tested or peer reviewed yet. But nevertheless, the BRICS nations, that is, they are going to go into production of the Russian vaccine. And that's 5 major nations. That's China, India, New Zealand. Well, I mean, what do you make of that?
Well, I think it's It's basically it's a preposition of uh, when you buy something as is where is. There are no guarantees. There is no trials. There is absolutely nothing. But people believe, and if it's reasonably priced and maybe free of charge, even better, then people believe, okay, so how it can harm me? Okay, most likely it's not going to help, but it's not going to harm either. So I'll take a chance. I'll take it, and I mean, one day we'll die anyway, sooner or later,
Okay,
right?
no.
So you might as well take this vaccine. And actually, Russians are very proficient in other types of vaccines, such as Novichok, which is
Right.
doing extremely well internationally. So people believe that if Russian can do Novichok, they might be wonderful at doing some other vaccines.
Okay, with the inclusion of China and India and Russia taking the lead, and just like they took the lead most recently on the new Pan-Asian trade deal, is it that Russia is trying to fill a void that the United States has abdicated, and that not only with economic trade and now with the vaccine, that they are indeed filling a role to displace the United States? Is that how you're looking at it, or what are you hearing?
Yes, that's one of the aspects to look at it. And the other thing is that the culture of developing this new vaccine is completely different in Russia from United States or other Western countries. They require much less trials. They do in certain ways cut the corners, although I'm not expert in this field, so I'm not going to insist on that. But it appears to me that they are willing, in order to achieve result, they are willing to do it fast and furious, cut the corners, get the cheapest price possible. And if that will give them the market share, and if you're talking about India and China, what else can you ask for? We're talking about billions of people right there. So with US vaccines are going through a stringent uh, the trial and periods and so on. And so at the end of the day, they will be quite expensive. The rate of success, 94% in Moderna case, is very encouraging. In Moderna case also, it's much easier to store and transport than a Pfizer variation. But we don't know very little about Russian, how accurate is this, and how it's been stored, how to transport it, or so on. So it's very difficult to compare. It's not like even apple and oranges case.
Okay, and I guess the issue is that if it has in this new the BRICS nations, that's what they're calling the Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Um, it's not only now with Russia, it's them asserting their authority in the Middle East. It's them asserting their authority in Eastern Europe with Azerbaijan and Armenia. It's now them asserting their authority, at least in the medical field, with obviously the number one item the world wants, which is the vaccine. But then they also, at the same conference or summit over the weekend, they also announced a grand counterterrorism strategy that was also involving the same nations. And so that seems to indicate increased military cooperation between these nations. And again, it's interesting because it includes India, China, and South Africa. So I thought that China and Russia didn't like each other.
It's a political ploy by Putin to continue to exert a Russian reach and fill void left by US around the globe. He is very skillful and he's very patient, and he's doing a really very, very good job at it. Now, the results are that especially is Trump trying to get these troops out of Afghanistan
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Iran, all that.
Yeah, actually, on that point, Trump, as part of the last 63 days, and one of the reasons it became clear that he terminated or fired the Secretary of Defense was that he installed this other gentleman because he wants to pull out the troops out of Afghanistan and Iraq before he leaves the presidency, which leads to some other questions about destabilization in the region and such. But the current plans are to draw down American forces to what some critics call a dangerously low level that's having a crippling effect on NATO. But yeah, Trump is looking to withdraw the stuff. Uh, but sure, go ahead. I'm listening. I apologize.
First of all, of course, what Trump is doing, it's a purely political moves. They're not military driven. They're purely political. What he wants to tell that he promised at the beginning of his presidency to pull all American troops away from all these countries, get them home. And although he couldn't do it in 4 years that he was president, so he's doing in his last 50, 60 days, whatever is left to him. And it leaves a very, very bad aftertaste because being basically outgoing president, nobody requires him to do any drastic moves because obviously the new people will be in town very soon, and I don't think that all his moves are could be justified.
Okay, which then leads me to this question. I was really curious about it because we've been talking about it for some time, Sasha, and that is to say that your notion for quite some time has simply been that the Trump has been there to help Putin underline NATO and underline America's standing in the world, and that previously your position was that although Putin did not get everything he wanted from Trump, that he got a lot of what he wanted in the sense of rattling our allies and joining forces with our enemies. Now, could it be that, and we've often joked about Trump's relationship with Putin, but at least on this point, it seems to me that this is really not a laughing matter, because could it be that Trump, in preparing for his post-presidency, is doing all that he can unilaterally to set up America's future foreign policy for failure, particularly when it comes to Russia? When you look at his pulling out of the Pacific Trade Agreement, which allowed for Russia to take the lead and China to take the lead. When you talk about Trump pulling out of the Middle East, which allowed Russia to take the lead. When you talk about this pandemic vaccine, Russia is taking the lead, and now including India as one of the world's largest democracies. And even in the Pacific Trade Deal, China kept the door open for India to join that group. And now with the pulling out of troops out of Afghanistan and Iraq, it's setting the United States up for very difficult circumstances where it might lead to bloodshed in advance of a redeployment of American troops. Do you see that as Trump's final down payment to Putin before he leaves office, Sasha?
Yes, obviously it is. And regardless what Trump is going to do in the next few years, just with exception of the fact if he would have to serve some time, so he might not be available to do any ventures which he's planning to do. But regardless, barring that, regardless what he's do, he for the last almost 20 years, he relied heavily on Russian supplied capital, and he's planning to continue to do so, especially that I doubt that he is in the position to repay almost $1 billion that he owes, of which over 400 million guaranteed personally by him. So he definitely has to work out refinancing deals, new ventures, and all that involve Russian capital. So he has to be on very, very good terms with Putin and his friends.
Okay. Well, then let me ask you this.
That would probably explain some of his actions or all of them.
Okay, well then let me ask you this: that do you think that, I hate to say this, but I mean, do you think that it's possibly, although we've mentioned it before, but I really want to dig into it, that it is possible that Trump is handing over our political, well, our military secrets, and which is one of the reasons why he has put a complete stop on any presidential daily briefings or security briefings from his administration to the incoming administration, so as to cover up what he's actually telling our adversaries in real time. Do you think that's a possibility, Sasha?
Of course, it's a possibility, and also it's incredibly difficult to imagine more damage that one man can do to a country than what Trump is doing now. So in critical time, when there is a coronavirus and its danger is increasing daily, and the international situation and economical collapse what's awaiting US, especially because there is no package deal with between Senate and Congress could be reached or anything like this. So to keep Biden duly elected new president of the United States and his team away from briefings and from transition, dutiful, lawful transition, I think that's the greatest damage what's Trump doing, and I'm surprised that the Democrats are not asking for very strong measures such as, well, I'm not saying I don't think that he could be impeached now, no, but I think that they have to completely overturn this Department of Justice recommendations that no sitting president can be indicted. I think they have to strike now in next 45 minutes and to strike the stupid Department of Justice doctrine that no sitting president can be indicted. He can do in his last few days, he can do so much damage to the United States that you can't even imagine, and that's exactly what he is doing.
Right. Okay. And I guess that's a real concern. But the idea that well, first, I think the Democrats aren't doing anything simply because they are fearful of the January 5th senatorial runoffs in Georgia, and they don't want to necessarily do anything that would upset what they believe to be possibly winning of the two Senate seats. But by the same token, at least on this point. You mentioned the Democrats. From the outside, do you think that the Republican Party and the Republican leaders have a greater sense of responsibility to deal with this issue that is Trump for the next 63 days than the Democrats do? Because after all, if Trump is in fact engaging in such behavior, it not only is it damaging the nation, but it falls on the Republican leadership to stand up and say no. Because if they don't say no, then who can say no to Trump? Sasha, from your point of view?
There is no Republican leadership. There is no Republican Party. It's a party of Trump. There are scared to death cronies who are going to do anything to please their leader. And only at such viewpoint you can understand what is Republican Party today. They don't care about people. They don't care about anything except pleasing Mr. Trump. That's all what they are.
Okay. All right. Well, let me ask you something else. How does it look from the outside, that is both Russia and Canada, with regard to Biden's incoming administration? Are people beginning to accept it? Are they moving? Are they excited in terms of how you're looking at it from across this globe?
Well, I've seen some Russian programs on first channel on television and also second channel as well. It seems to me that they're quite reluctantly accepting the fact that probably Trump will go. although very reluctantly, and they're always emphasizing that there are a lot of battles ahead of them, and Trump is not going to go away anywhere, and all this is the Biden. He will, even if he will get to the power, he will hold it for a few months, and then the Democrats will collapse, and Trump will be immediately asked to become president again. The mechanism is very unclear to me, because even if he will collapse, then there is a vice president who is very capable woman. She will take over, but I think that Russian haven't learned yet, so they will have to learn it in the next few days.
Okay. Listen, I want to turn our attention just for a bit. The EU is having a number of problems. First with Brexit, then obviously the pandemic and the second surge all across Europe, the closing downs, the mechanisms. But what's going on with this notion that the EU can't even pass their own budget at $2.1 trillion? I mean, and how's that? How are you looking at that as an investor across this globe?
Well, European Union is a very special case, and I'm still trying to understand how it all works, because I can't imagine how there could be an organization where countries like Germany on one hand and Greece on the other hand, she's completely different countries with different economies, different sizes, different everything. There is no, I can't find anything what's common between Germany and Greece, and they can be part of the same organization and participate in the same budget and have same currency. I just can't understand it. I think maybe some professionally educated economists would explain to me that, but I never heard that.
Well, apparently, and this is, I think, of some concern when we look around the world. In addition to all the other issues, as you know, one of the things that we're trying to do, I guess the world is trying to do, is to get the world economy back in order. And it seems that the European Union, they tied this new budget proposal to reforms in the laws for both Hungary, Poland, and some economic reforms with Greece, who is also set to receive a bailout. And Turkey is still involved because they're fighting with Greece over various other issues. And so the main disagreement has been that some of the EU countries want the money, but they don't want to adopt any of the reforms. How do you make sense of that? Because
that's very natural thing. I remember Greece several years ago. There was the same thing. They didn't want to yield to demands of Germany to get new money, and actually they almost were forced to have an election at that time, and the new elected government adopted partially the measures, and they negotiated actually a refinancing deal with Germany. So this time there is nothing new, except that we have to guess whether there will be, in fact, election in Greece to cure this problem, or there is not going to be election.
Yeah.
And how strong and how forceful Germany and France and others will be toward Greece.
Yeah, but I mean, doesn't that also raise this prospect that it's tough enough? I mean, for so long, at least up until for the last 6 months or at least a year, we've been just talking about just the need to get the American economy back in order, to get fiscal stability, get a fiscal stimulus package, get monetary expansionary policies, and get a direction that was predictable for the markets, which would then send the cascading messages of stability around the globe. Now, with that in mind, the fact that the EU can't pass their upcoming budget, isn't that the same as the U.S. Not being able to raise their debt ceiling? And it would lead, and just in the case of the United States, it would lead to the United States defaulting on its loans. If the EU can't pass their budget for next year, that would lead them to a default, and that would undermine the euro, wouldn't it, Sasha?
The difference between European Union approach to financial issues and United States is that the last thing what European Union thinks about how stock market will react to this or that development. Especially, don't forget, although they have same budget for all countries and how it works, they have different stock markets. They have Frankfurt, they have Paris, they have well, forget about London for a moment. Although London is far the biggest and most important market in the world, but forget about it for now. They also have the markets, Spain and Italy, they have their own stock exchange and so on. But they don't care so much about their stock exchanges because they think that, first of all, in Europe, fewer people, in percentage-wise, own stocks than in the United States. And even in the United States, very few people these days own stock except through 401k. So Europeans, they are passing on a budget the considerations how stock market will react, whether it will go higher or lower. It's not a major thing at all.
Okay. So
like in US is a slightly different.
No, and I understand that. I guess what I'm trying to drill down to is just all of these secondary and tertiary indicia of instability, notwithstanding what everybody's trying to do on a global scale. And to this, while we're still focusing in on Europe, we are fast approaching the deadline for the Brexit deal. So it's literally deal or no deal. Not to paraphrase the game show that we run here in the United States, but it's literally deal or no deal. And in the face of all that, the UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson is picking a fight with Scotland. I mean, what do you make of that, Sasha?
Well, I think it's about time to get serious about Brexit deal and accept the fact that very soon Great Britain or United Kingdom or England or whatever it might be will not be part of European Union.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a done reality. I don't see all the financial implications of that. It's very difficult, according to some, especially our own Shaquille.
Mm-hmm.
That will benefit Great Britain, and well, he has points to make about that, and probably I could agree with that. But again, a similar situation was in Canada about 30 years ago when a populist government of Quebec made the notion to leave Canada and have Quebec as independent country. There was a referendum, and believe it or not, it was almost 50%. They didn't get to 50% like a hair. So Quebec stayed in Canada for the time being. However, a couple of years later, there was a study by economists, and they proved that Quebec would collapse in no time once it would be an independent country, assuming per capita the debt of overall Canadian debt. And it wouldn't survive even for a few months. So maybe the study was so good that there was never a second referendum.
Well, no, actually, I mean, I do recall that referendum, and it was quite heated, and it almost became, if you can say, nationalistic, because you had the French speaking and then the non-French speaking, and it was a real mess up there. And you're right, just for our audience's information. So with Sasha, when you were talking about Quebec as part of the exit deal, or the referendum in Canada, they would have to assume a proportional share of the overall Canadian debt, and they would have to take that. And that caused a lot of people in Quebec to vote for their financial pockets. Now, I guess what I'm asking is this, is that, first of all, Scotland makes up such a small part of the UK, and apparently they are opposing Johnson and the Brexit deal because they're saying that Brexit is bad for the UK. So Johnson is attacking Scotland and saying that their ability to self-govern was the worst mistake that Tony Blair ever made. So you've got all this infighting with them. And meanwhile, you've got the deadline, which is December 31st. and the UK is not doing anything about it. And I don't know if it's that the rest of the world was paying so much attention to what was going on in the United States that they forgot about the collateral effects of a no deal Brexit move. Do you think the world has just been distracted, Sasha?
Yes, I agree. I agree with that notion. And well, Scots definitely have a point in their position and what they're making. But technically speaking, I really don't see how they can advance their cause, although they have a good one.
Hmm.
But how technically they're going to deal with that, that's really unclear to me.
Okay. Well, I see. It seems to me, and this is the one thing that has just been puzzling, and that is that uh, we we never really thought or could contemplate the entire scope of the Trump administration. And now, even though there are only 63 days left, I'm not sure that we fully understand the size and the scope of what can be done or not done in 63 days that substantially uh, sets the world back as a whole. And what it looks like is that with it just on the financial front, we're left with instability on a global scale, whether it's Brexit, whether it's the EU, whether it's the Pacific trade deals, whether the UK is unstable, whether or not the US economy is back in order, or what the disruptions are going to be, given the amount of money that the Trump administration has squandered over the last 3 years. Then militarily, we're looking at a jumbled up world. With joint exercises between people that normally didn't even talk to each other, and our allies being skeptical of us. And then this emerging leadership, for whatever it's worth, China in some areas, Russia in other areas, and again combined with allies that cannot necessarily believe first and foremost that they can defend on the United States. Isn't that possibly the most dangerous set of conditions, Sasha, moving forward for any American president incoming?
I'm afraid that in the last 63 days of his presidency, Trump will inflict even more damage than in the last 4 years. Obviously, he was not equipped to do any international deals and alliances whatsoever, because as a practical real estate speculator and swindler, he is a very deal-oriented person whose goal is to screw his vis-a-vis.
Mhm.
That approach absolutely doesn't work in international relations. You have to build trust, alliances, and that's what Trump absolutely failed to do so, and he couldn't. He's not equipped with that. It's against his nature to do this. So
Okay.
I wouldn't be surprised if the void left by United States on the international scene will be very quickly filled with China primarily,
Mhm.
but also Russia to a certain degree, although regardless how economically Russia is backward, but I wouldn't be surprised if China will invite Russia to the Pacific trade organization, especially Russia has a Pacific uh,
Mhm.
access to a Pacific Ocean, as we know.
Right.
So China could invite Russia there. So can you imagine the Pacific Trade Organization without US and with Russia in?
Right, which would be no different than the counterpart, which is what we have, the G210, the because we kicked Russia out after they invaded, I believe, Ukraine or
Yeah,
Crimea.
right.
But then we'd have a realignment, an economic realignment with Russia and China on one side, America on the other, and Russia and China getting all of these brand new allies that believe they can count on these authoritarian governments. And it surprisingly would include nations, possibly, at least according to the Indian Prime Minister Modi, it would include India, which is the world's largest democracy.
Right. So I'm telling you that, as I said before, Trump has already inflicted incredible damage to U.S. and the last 63 days, what's left, it will be more of the same, if not
Okay.
worse.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
All right. One of the things, because I know you to be a student of history as well, and that is a trend that I found interesting is that there really is no emerging trend with these nations regarding their governments. We have prime examples of some governments uh, moving and becoming liberal. For example, New Zealand with they just reelected their prime minister and becoming quite progressive with the representational vote of women in government and previously underrepresented minorities in that nation being represented. On the other hand, you have countries like Thailand, which the current government is still fighting for any kinds of changes whatsoever. And more importantly, although it's understandable, China cracking down on Hong Kong and essentially removing any of the last vestiges of traits or inclinations or movements towards democracy. Now, oftentimes in the past, Sasha, it's been clear where a majority of the nations have longed for, and that was towards freedom and democracy. But in today's world, it's a real mixed bag. What do you make of this non-trend trend?
Well, the world is changing, and especially because of the Trump's administration, the appeal of U.S. Based democracy is definitely diminished in the world, and the autocratic countries like China,
Hmm.
and to a lesser degree Russia, making progress. So their model of government is becoming well more appealing than others, and so the to more or less the degree the other countries are trying to follow what these countries are doing. So Thailand is a very special case because, as I remember, Thailand is a kingdom.
Hmm.
And so at the end of the day, I think the king is the ruler of a country, not the parliament. Though technically, maybe parliament is doing all the stuff, same as England, I would say. So it's a parliamentary kingdom
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
both countries, right?
Currently, Thailand is based loosely on the English model, so that they have a constitutional monarchy, but the parliamentarian side of their constitutional monarchy and parliamentary government is really slated towards the military because the person in charge right now was the former head of the military, and um, uh, they executed a coup and then took over the government and then dictated this constitution, which is apparently very, very restrictive and has been the subject of protest for quite some time. But you're right, Thailand is different. But I guess I want to ask this in terms of how we're looking at the trend. Uh, we have the rise of these autocratic governments that some argue are vastly more efficient than democratic governments. We have essentially a split decision with smaller countries around the globe, some going in the direction of democracies, others going in the area or the direction of um, autocratic, like and or dictatorial nations. But as they get bigger, it would seem to me that the autocratic nations would be following the model of Turkey if they don't outright follow either Russia or China. And that seems to lead to the question, such as the deal between Armenia and Azerbaijan, which essentially you have Russia, an autocratic democracy, and you have Turkey, an autocratic democracy, getting together and those two cutting a deal about what other nations' futures are going to look like. Is that going to be the wave of the new kinds of agreements coming around the world with these autocratic nations rising up and the deals out in the world being essentially two of the bigger countries by dictate, dividing up the world and solving conflicts? Sasha, do you see that?
Um, well, what I believe is that when there is a certain vacuum, there is a force that will fill that vacuum.
Hmm.
So the United States left a huge vacuum about and around the world and several areas, and that vacuum is going to be filled by first of all aggressive regimes such as Turkey's Erdogan.
Hmm.
I think he's going to feel a lot of this, starting from Syria and Azerbaijan, Armenia conflict, and everywhere else, wherever he can get geographically. And at least one good thing about Turkey is that they are interested primarily in their region. They're not going as far as Africa or India or some other countries. They're concentrating in their region. But in their region, they are superpower by all means. They have the strongest NATO army,
Hmm.
the US, but because the US is not participating in that region, so Turkey is the first, most strongest army by far in that region, with exception of Russia. But Russia is, for several reasons, they are avoiding direct confrontation with Turkey. So when Russia is trying to measure its response and trying to be very careful in what it's doing and what it says, Turkey doesn't have that restraint. They are feeling this immediately, all the vacuum, whatever is there. And Russia probably will yield unless Turkey will start a direct attack against Russian forces, which I don't think even Erdogan would try to do.
Okay. Right.
So, yeah, and I think we discussed on one of the programs here that Turkey wants to create the Muslim caliphate, the modern
Okay.
caliphate.
Okay.
That's what they're trying to do
Okay.
in that region.
Okay. Well, I guess because that leads me to this question that I was hoping you might have some insight on. It seems to me that uh, with all of this uncertainty and chaos across just about every single major pillar underpinning our global society, that is economically, militarily, and then in terms of uh, just well, I guess cooperation approach and governmental styles. It seems that one, or I should say, would you agree that perhaps one of the first drafts of the impact of a Trump presidency on the globe has been to unleash and or spark uh, a a nationalistic expansionist kind of ideology across nations, where we are descending into re- away. We're moving away from uh, uh, two superpowers into areas of tribalism, regionalism, and regional autonomy with uh, multiple rulers. I mean, is that how you're seeing it?
Yeah, totally agree with you because if Trump says America first, so says Hungarian Viktor Orban, Hungary is
Mhm.
first. And then someone will say that Azerbaijan is first, and obviously Turkey is first. So everybody is first. So who's going to be second? So second will be one who will challenge the whoever is number one. So
Uh-huh.
there will be a fight for supremacy, and this is. I don't think that it will last for long. This movement, but unfortunately, it's there. And if you remember, 30th of last century, the Germany was first. Germans über alles. Remember?
Right. I do. And see, and actually, I mean, you're just this is why you're my favorite foreigner, Sasha, because I was simply going to say that when we look at this, and if we tend to agree that the world is now, while we're nation states or nations with various forms of government, we've essentially descended back into a series of tribes, and such that perhaps our political circumstances around the globe are closely resembling that which we were at the beginning of the last turn of the century, just prior to World War One. What would you say? What would you say to that analogy, Sasha?
Okay, the analogy with the first World War One.
Where we had tribalistic nations where people were, their country first, and it was a series of these bilateral deals, but no comprehensive kind of organizational structure. That's what I mean to ask or
It
convey.
appears to me. It appears to me that the First World War was unavoidable, although it happened by an accident of Serbian nationalists killed Austrian Herzog. But I think the war was unavoidable in any case because, as a result of the Industrial Revolution, England was by far the world power, and the United States started to emerge. And Germany, which was unified by Bismarck in
Right. Right.
1870, Germany found itself without world markets, locked into this land where it occupied, and it felt that it hasn't been dealt justly by other world powers. Now, technologically and financially, Germans by 1914, they already surpassed England.
Uh-huh.
And obviously, they had all reasons to fight for the world supremacy. And if it wouldn't be the circumstances, they had to fight on two fronts with Russia
No, no,
and
no, I understand it.
of US, they had the practical chances to succeed.
Okay. Okay, I'm asking. It may not be 100% alignment for each country the exact same way it was in prior to World War One, but it seems to me the same tensions are at play. You have countries around the globe, whether it's North Korea, whether it's Iran, that are the target of sanctions and feel economically repressed. You have other nations around the globe that are technologically advanced than than many of the other nations. You had the United States clearly in a lead position, which is akin to what England was back at the turn of the century. And then you have a number of nations pursuing their nation first policies and becoming regional powers, particularly Turkey, even though Turkey is part of NATO, but they're teaming up with the Russians and they've been buying Russian military equipment. So all of our military alliances are now fluid. All of the economic alliances are in play because of the uncertain economy and people not willing to get together, all with this underlying notion that we still don't have control of the COVID pandemic, and that makes it slightly different. Although back in World War I, we had the misnamed Spanish flu. So you don't see the same tensions and the very conditions that existed 100 some odd years ago, Sasha, as existing now in the 21st century.
Yeah, there is a lot of similarity, but I don't recall any situation in history similar to what Trump did with the United States, which is completely withdrew from all the international agreements, all the treaties, almost killed NATO. By the way, NATO is in crisis because it's unclear as if it indeed there would be attack against one of the NATO members, whether it could be not probably Turkey, but rather one of the Baltic states, like
Right.
Estonia, for example. I'm not sure that the United States will rush to rescue Estonia from the perhaps Russian attack possible. So the NATO is in jeopardy, is the way I think now. And I think I'm not so sure even what's the future, unless Biden administration will be able forcefully start correcting all these problems. I don't know where we are going with all that.
Okay, well, let's welcome Nick Palavita to the World Edition. Nick, we've been talking about, most recently Europe and whether or not the conditions that exist now with the destabilization of the world on a number of fronts is akin to the type of pattern and circumstances and tensions that we saw just prior to World War I. Whether there's anything that we can learn from history on that point. And you obviously, we can see. Go ahead.
No, we don't learn anything from history. Come on, Bill. Where you been? We wouldn't have World War I and World War II if we learned anything from history. So, and we wouldn't have COVID-19 if we learned anything from the pandemic of 1918. Mm-hmm. So humans are pretty bad at that. That's the reason computers are much better to solve people's problems, and we need to start organizing that way because people are make serious mistakes. And computers, they do everything. They land airplanes, drive cars, move technology. And unfortunately, what you do is get a lot of wingnuts that run into politics. And I think that's what we're seeing in this whole Azerbaijani-Armenian conflict. it's not the people. It's the wingnuts that tend to get into politics. You know that. You live in that swampland called Washington, D.C., and a lot of that is driven by wingnuts. And unfortunately, you get one of them in power, they can create all sorts of havoc for everybody else. They're just trying to live a decent life.
Well, you're right.
And the problem I had with yesterday, though, Sasha, is that we had no representatives from Azerbaijan. So, and this to me is wrong. I like to listen to both sides, and we're heavily influenced by the Armenian side because I learned a lot about the fact there's a lot of Armenians in the United States, maybe more than even in Armenia. I mean, seriously. So, but we're getting one side of the story. On all stories, there are two sides, and we didn't get a chance to listen to the other side. Part of it is we just didn't have any representatives from Azerbaijan. You know. It's easy to criticize the other side. We had no representatives from Turkey. In other words, you know, hey, Turkey's bad, Azerbaijan's bad. Wait a minute. Let's get these people to the table and see what they have to say. And our jurist, Bill, always likes to listen to two sides. Our Honorable Bill Trezevant, you know, in law practice, you don't listen to one side and the other side doesn't get to speak. You get to listen to two sides, you know, complain. Right, Honorable Trezevant?
Yeah, the mercenary that I am includes so that even if one side pays, I have to at least listen to the other side in court.
Sure.
Is that right?
Yeah, right. Unless you're in the courts in Russia, then one side's good enough to make a decision. You know, you don't need the other side. so it really depends on where you're at. Hey, and speaking of Russia, I hope you're able to get. I've been trying to get programming from Russia, Sasha, and I run into stone walls all the time there. In other words, we're getting a program out of Mexico City. We're getting a program that's going to show up from the Netherlands. We already have one from Malaysia, Nicaragua. We have one from Malaysia. We have one from South Africa and Nigeria. But getting into Russia is like, you know, there's got to be somebody who has the magic key. I know over here they actually have a whole network called Russian Times, RT. I don't know if you get it there.
Yes.
You do get that? Yeah, I used to watch it because
yes, I watched RT. It's pure Russian propaganda in English.
Yeah, sure.
I'm sure that you wouldn't want that.
Right. Well, when I got tired of watching American propaganda, I watched RT, and I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah.
I get the Russian propaganda.
Actually, Nick, I thought RT because I watched it a couple of times. I thought it was rural television.
No, it's Russia Today.
No, it's Russian television, dude.
No, it's Russia. No, the translation is Russia Today.
Okay.
Russia Today, really? Okay, Russia Today.
It was always about farms in Iowa, and I thought it was rural television, but fine.
It could be mistaken for rural television. There's no question about it.
And I guess on that point, Sasha, next question, because you've been working on this idea for quite some time. There are a number of expat Russians across the globe, and as you pointed out, in Boynton Beach in New York City, in a number of
I think it's called Brighton Beach. Brighton Beach is in Florida. I used to have an office in Boynton. Brighton Beach is in Brooklyn, and it's full of Russians right now.
Yeah, but
we didn't get some of those guys to get on TV.
Yeah, I know, but isn't Florida just nothing but ex-New Yorkers, Nick? It seems to me.
No, because that's only if you're in the East Coast. On the West Coast, there are people from Michigan, Ohio, Indiana. So if you're in Naples, they go down 75. If you're in the East Coast, they go down 95. So.
Okay. So, Sasha, how are you making headway on your idea of a program about Russia, perhaps populated with your Russian colleagues?
Okay, I'll let you know what my thoughts on that is. Of course, there's a lot of former Russians or people from former Soviet Union, rather, live in areas of Brighton Beach, Brooklyn, so is in California, in Florida, and many other parts of the United States. And we're talking about millions of people. A lot of them are watching Russian-sponsored television, such as First Channel. You can watch it very easily. You can get it through Roku. You can get it through subscription services or so on. So one way or another, they're watching that. Now, my position is one of two. Either I would like to inform our English-speaking Americans about what Russian channels are saying and explain their point of view and even criticize when and if necessary. And it will be a lot of if and when. Now, if you're talking about Russian-speaking population, then you might as well do it in Russian and discuss these programs and so on. But that's probably not something what our English-speaking audience would like to see. So I'm thinking about one or maybe both formats, but I think probably we are better equipped to work in the English format. So basically informing English of what's going on in Russian.
And they when I was in St. Petersburg, they spoke English very well, the Russians there. So I thought they were pretty good. And then Moscow has a population of over 10 million people. No,
Yes.
it would be the biggest city in the Europe if it was considered part of Europe. It's absolutely huge. But maybe Istanbul is bigger. Heard that was 15 million. So they're both huge cities. But the real problem is, at least over here, Bill, and Sasha, I can't tune into major television and see any shows that originate from Russia. None. And the thing is, it's to me, it's kind of weird because we have the internet, we have the capability, we have the ability to build that bridge between Russia and the United States, and nobody's building it. It's like, and I can't tell you why, but I guess because 5 channels rule the United States, 1 rule Russia, 6 of them, if they can't get together and do anything, nothing gets done. But this is where we can intercept and actually have Russian television. Yours is the closest, Sasha, because you bring in, grandmasters from Russia and people from Eastern Europe. But man, outside of your show, it's really difficult to get that. Okay, we got to get going because the travel show is starting.
I think who's very successful of building bridges with Russia? Donald Trump. However, he's building his own bridges. Got nothing to do with those of the United States of America.
Okay, well. Okay, Nick, do you want to land this plane?
The plane better take off because the travel show is starting on IBMTV.